The heat of the high desert wasn't a comfortable warmth. It was a physical weight, pressing the air from Elias Vance's lungs. He rode a black horse that seemed to absorb the sun, traversing miles of cracked earth until the town of Obsidian Ridge finally appeared, a dark scar on the pale, unrelenting hide of the land. Elias, known in certain circles as the Quiet, had been a Pinkerton for 8 years before the cold trail of his sister's disappearance broke him, turning him into the solitary, efficient engine of vengeance he was now. The name was not about skill, yet was about the terrible, self-imposed silence he carried. He brought two things: a keen eye for discrepancy and a guilt that weighed more than the sawed-off Winchester resting in his saddle sheath. The bounty warrant for Silas Reed. The serpent, notorious for charming the gold right out of a lock siphon, was crumpled in his pocket. A reward of $500, enough to keep the ghost quiet for another month. The note on the margin read, "Last seen vicinity of Obsidian Ridge. Proceed with caution. Unnaturally isolated." Elias paused on the ridge overlooking the town. Obsidian Ridge was not built so much as it was extruded from the ground. Its structures were of a drab, gray timber, and every street was perfectly straight, cut into the dust with geometric precision that felt utterly wrong for the chaotic, sprawling West. But it was the silence that struck him. It was not the natural silence of the desert night, the whistle of wind, the crunch of a pebble, the distant bark of a coyote. This was an engineered silence, a void where noise should have been. No dogs barked, no children played. The only sound was the rhythmic, soft clop of his horse, a sound that seemed to be instantly consumed by the atmosphere the moment it was made. Elias rode down the main street. The townspeople were all out, seemingly going about their business. Near a blacksmith hammering, a woman hanging laundry, a few men unloading carts. Yet their movements were unnervingly slow, deliberate, and synchronized. Every face Elias passed was a mask of perfect, unblinking calm, devoid of curiosity, fear, or even simple fatigue. They looked through him, not at him. He stopped his horse outside the saloon, a place called the Black Vein. The psychological pressure was immense, a heavy static that hummed behind his eyes. It felt less like a town, and more like a carefully staged performance for an absent audience. A man emerged from the saloon, tall and thick-shouldered, wearing a sheriff's star polished to a blinding sheen. This was Hale. Sheriff Hale moved with the same preternatural serenity as the others, but there was a sharp, calculating intelligence behind his unnaturally light, pale eyes. "Afternoon, sir," Hale said, his voice a low, level baritone that seemed to fight against the town's forced quiet. "You look thirsty. We don't get many riders through here." "Elias Vance," Elias stated, dismounting. He didn't offer a hand. "I'm looking for a man named Silas Reed. Train robbery." Hale's expression remained unchanged, though a tiny muscle twitched in his jaw, the first sign of humanity Elias had seen. "Reed? Yes, we had him. Tried to jump the payroll coach a mile north. He's secured. Came in quiet as a lamb." Elias frowned. Silas, the serpent Reed, the man who had shot his way out of 4 different jails, coming in quiet? It felt too neat, a carefully laid trap. "Where is he?" "For his own safety," Hale replied, folding his hands across his wide chest. "In the old church tower. We got the only key. Best place for a man of his volatility." Hale paused, then offered a slight, almost mechanical smile. "I can take you there, Mr. Vance. We're a cooperative town." The unsettling ease of the capture only intensified the invisible alarm ringing in Elias's head. The old church stood on the only hill in Obsidian Ridge, its stone spire casting a long, black finger over the silent community. The air here was colder, smelling faintly of ozone and dry, milled stone. Sheriff Hale led Elias up the rotting wooden steps. At the top of the tower, in a small, damp chamber repurposed as a holding cell, was Silas Reed. Silas was not the suave, confident serpent of the wanted posters. He was hunched, trembling, his expensive clothes stained with sweat and grime, his eyes wide and red-rimmed. He was tied to a chair, but the bindings looked redundant. Fear held him tighter than any rope. As Hale unlocked the heavy iron door, Silas screamed a dry, panicked sound that instantly withered in the silent air. "It sings!" Silas shrieked, struggling violently against the chair. "It won't shut up! The stone yet sings inside your skull, Vance. It's the silence that eats the mind." Hale stepped in, swift and effortless, and jammed a handkerchief into Silas's mouth. "Quiet, prisoner," he murmured, his voice surprisingly gentle, like a man soothing a hysterical child. Elias pushed past the sheriff, his professional deduction taking over the rising dread. "Reed, stop the dramatics. The reward's confirmed. You're coming back with me." Silas, muffled, shook his head wildly, tears cutting paths through the dirt on his cheeks. He pointed a shaking finger at the walls, which were constructed partly of the unnaturally smooth, black, non-metallic rock that gave the town its name. "The quiet, it's a trade, Vance. They pay it with their thoughts. They feed it silence so it won't drive them mad. But it still whispers. It whispers, 'You are nothing.'" Silas's eyes darted frantically to Sheriff Hale, who stood with his back to them, calmly inspecting the chains. Elias dismissed it instantly. Fear and isolation did this to men. Silas was facing the gallows. Raving paranoia was expected, yet the sheer, panicked conviction in the man's eyes hit him harder than the scream itself. He'd seen men lose their minds in worse places, but never an entire town that seemed proud of it. "Secure him better, Sheriff," Elias commanded. "I need a few hours' rest. We ride out before dawn." "As you wish, Mr. Vance," Hale said, turning back. The sheriff's smile was wide now, but it didn't reach his eyes. "He is secured. I will personally watch the area below. We are committed to order here in Obsidian Ridge." Elias took the key, noted the massive iron lock, and made his way back down to the saloon. He needed to shake off the oppressive stillness of the town before the morning ride. He needed to think. He needed a drink. Elias rented a small, dry room above the saloon, the only place that didn't feel saturated with the town's strange, silent pressure. He forced down 2 glasses of cheap whiskey, stripped down to his undershirt, and lay on the hard cot, the obsidian bell's eerie quiet settling over him like a burial shroud. He fell into a shallow, fitful sleep, filled with fragmented images, the pale, unblinking eyes of the townspeople, the black, geometric lines of the streets, and the single fleeting memory of his sister-in-law's laughter, abruptly cut off, swallowed by the darkness. At precisely 2:17 a.m., Elias woke. There was no external noise, no creaking floorboard or shouted argument that broke the silence. The awakening was internal, a physical sensation akin to a powerful, soundless thump that reverberated through the marrow of his bones. It was the same feeling he'd known once before, the night his sister vanished, when the air itself seemed to flinch. It felt like a massive heart had just beaten once, deep below the earth. Elias was instantly alert. He grabbed his gun belt, yanked on his boots, and raced down the stairs. The saloon below was dark, only the embers of the stove providing a faint red glow. Sheriff Hale was gone from his post outside the church. He ran towards the hill. The church tower door was still locked, the iron massive and unbreachable. He fumbled with the key, his hands sweating, and threw the door open. The chamber was empty. Silas Reed was gone. The heavy chair was overturned. The ropes that had bound him lay neatly coiled beside it, untouched and uncut. Elias's cold, professional anger gave way to a chilling sense of absolute impossibility. The iron door was intact. The stone walls were solid. The only window was too high and barred. Then he saw the floor. The rough-hewn stone paving near the overturned chair was gouged. Not scraped, but deeply raked with a single, thick indentation channel 3 inches wide and a foot long, as if something with enormous, non-human strength and a massive claw had dragged itself across the floor and vanished through the solid rock. The gouge was already cooling, surrounded by a thin, black dust that smelled faintly of ozone and burnt salt. As Elias stood there, heart hammering against his ribs, his boot kicked against a small, dense object hidden under the chair. He picked it up. It was a small bell, perfectly formed and carved from the same black, glassy obsidian as the church walls. It was non-metallic, cold to the touch. And when Elias shook it, it produced absolutely no external sound. Yet deep in his chest, Elias felt a faint thrum, a vibration that resonated faintly against the barely visible scar beneath his collar wound he'd acquired trying to find her, like a tuning fork vibrating against his own nervous system. Silas had not been taken by men. He had been taken by something that moved through solid rock and was quiet enough to be missed by an entire town. Dawn broke cold and gray, staining the silent streets with an unsettling light. Elias confronted Sheriff Hale in his office by the mine entrance, the obsidian bell heavy in his coat pocket. Hale was impeccably dressed, sipping coffee from a cracked porcelain cup. He listened to Elias's account of the vanished prisoner, the untouched lock, and the claw mark on the floor with perfect, placid calm. "A claw mark, Mr. Vance?" Hale asked, setting down the cup. Perhaps the delirium set in early. Silas Reed was known to be a colorful liar. "The door was locked, Sheriff," Elias grated, slamming the key down on the desk. "The only exit was that lock, and I had the key, and the floor was scored down to the bedrock." "A tremor," Hale suggested, utterly unfazed. "We're mining here, after all. These old timbers shift." Ellis leaned across the desk, his face inches from the sheriff's. "You said you were guarding the approach. Did you see anyone, anything, hear even a breath out of the ordinary?" Hale met his stare, his pale eyes utterly emotionless. "I saw nothing, Mr. Vance. I heard nothing. This is a quiet town, sir. Perhaps the serpent slipped his bonds and left through the window after you left. He was desperate. They say desperate men can fit through small places." "The window is barred," Elias pointed out, his voice dangerously low. "Then perhaps he went through the roof," Hale concluded, his tone suggesting the matter was settled. Elias spent the next hour interrogating the workers arriving for the morning shift. The miner who handled the church supplies, the deputy who swept the main street, the stable hand. Every single one of them, from the moment Elias began his questioning, recited the same pre-rehearsed accounts, their pale eyes distant and calm. "We saw nothing, sir. This is a quiet town." The deputy repeated it. "Heard nothing. This is a quiet town, sir." The stable hand affirmed it. "We are focused on our labor. This is a quiet town." Elias understood now. The bounty hunt was over. His quarry was gone, devoured by some local horror. But the hunter in him couldn't leave. This town was more than just quiet. It was dead inside, a collective, deliberate lie. The entire community was under some form of control or hypnotic trance, guarding a terrifying secret buried beneath the black rock they mined. Obsidian Ridge had swallowed Silas Reed, and now it was trying to swallow Elias Vance's attention, demanding he, too, accept the pervasive, suffocating silence. Elias clutched the tiny, soundless obsidian bell in his pocket. It was his only lead, a physical piece of the impossible truth. He knew the entity had taken Silas because Silas had broken the silence, and now Elias, who had never fully recovered his own will and soul after his sister's vanishing, was determined to break it for good. Elias spent the remainder of the morning observing. The town moved with the cold, silent efficiency of a clockwork mechanism. Every action was precise, every face a blank slate. He realized the question wasn't who took Silas Reed, but what the town was doing to hide it. He sat in the dusty, deserted saloon, nursing a stale beer, the small obsidian bell resting on the bar counter. It looked like a child's toy, utterly harmless, yet its mere presence seemed to warp the oppressive silence around it, creating a pocket of nervous stillness. Elias picked it up and held it near a discarded block of rough-cut obsidian ore used as a doorstop. The result was immediate and violent. The obsidian bell began to thrum rapidly in his palm, not with external sound, but with an internal vibration that felt like a swarm of insects inside his ear. A mental wave, cold and indifferent, hit him like a hammer. For one blinding moment, Elias felt what the townspeople must feel, a psychic void where his mind should have been. It was not pain, but the horrifying realization of non-existence, a pure, ancient apathy that attempted to strip away his individuality. He dropped the bell gasping, the vision of his own empty head dissolving instantly. When he looked at the ore block, he no longer saw rock. He saw a frozen fragment of the thing that had given the town its silence. The bell wasn't a weapon, it was an artifact, perhaps a key, perhaps a dampener. Whatever its origin, it was the only piece of the entity that had resisted the assimilation. Elias pocketed the bell. He needed information the town wouldn't give. He needed the noise the town refused to make. Tamarashitsur, the oracle of dirt and soap, the only place in Obsidian Ridge that showed the natural signs of human labor. Dirt, stain, and heat was Maeve, Warren's laundry shack, nestled at the very edge of the geometric streets. Smoke rose from its chimney, and the smell of lye and steam cut through the arid air. Ilias approached cautiously. Unlike the miners who move with robotic grace, the elderly woman hanging clothes on the line moved with the clumsy, honest slowness of age. She was completely blind, her milky white eyes fixed on the empty horizon. "They smell the bounty on you, Mr. Vance," she said, her voice a reedy whisper, startling Elias. "They smell the noise you carry, and they wonder why it hasn't been eaten yet." Elias stopped, removing his hat. "You know my name?" "I know the sound of a man who hasn't finished burying his dead," Maeve replied, turning her face toward him, though her eyes saw nothing. "And I know the sound of the silence that took your bounty. It's too heavy for a mortal thief." Elias was stunned. She was the first person in town to acknowledge the truth, the first person to display an actual, complex emotion, a weary resignation. He slowly produced the obsidian bell and held it out. "Do you know what this is?" Maeve reached out with a gnarled hand. As her fingers brushed the cold obsidian, a violent shiver ran through her body. She didn't recoil but gripped the bell tightly. "The obsidian heart," she breathed, "a shard of the great lullaby. It was meant to keep the vein quiet, but the town became greedy. They wanted more than quiet. They wanted peace, the kind that drains the soul." Maeve explained that the town wasn't possessed but addicted. Decades ago, the miners struck a vein of deep, black ore in the vein. The entity beneath it projected a constant, low-grade psychic hum that drove the first settlers mad with self-awareness and anxiety. The elders discovered that by collectively suppressing all emotion, memory, and individuality, by achieving perfect, absolute silence, they could dampen the entity's hum, creating a false, comfortable tranquility. "But the vein is hungry," Maeve whispered, handing the bell back. "It feeds on what they surrender, their will, their memory, their fear. They keep it docile with their silence, and now they are just shells, waiting for the final meal." Silas Reed broke the silence. He was too loud. The entity claimed him as a morsel. Elias asked why she was untouched. "The vein feeds on consciousness and individuality," Maeve replied, her voice gaining a hint of the mystical. "I am blind, Elias. I see the world as patterns, not as objects. My mind is already halfway in the dark. It finds my thoughts unappetizing. They are just the sounds of dirt and water, not the sound of a beating heart." Elias felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. The town wasn't guarding a secret. They were living a ritual. Konarihuri, infiltration, and the silent labor. Under Maeve's direction, Elias learned the town's routine yin, the precise rhythmic shifts that the entity's influence enforced. At noon, the mine guards changed with mechanical efficiency. This was Eliasor's window. He slipped past the rotating guards, using the sheer predictability of their movements as cover. The descent into the mine was like entering another world in a world of black, damp stone and the unnerving, constant thrumming. The obsidian bell in his pocket vibrated steadily, guiding him deeper. The mine was a vast cathedral of black rock. The air was thick with the scent of minerals and something else, something organic, like ozone and dried blood. He came to a stop in a cavernous chamber. Below him, the mining operation was in full, terrifying swing. The miners moved silently, their lanterns barely cutting through the oppressive blackness. They weren't just chipping ore. They were performing surgery on something colossal. The great vein was revealed a massive, undulating, semi-organic structure that pulsed with a faint, internal black light. It wasn't granite. It was a lattice of crystalline segments, like a frozen, petrified nervous system of a creature too large to imagine. The ore that gave the town its wealth was merely the outer, hardened segments of this dormant cosmic being. Elias crept into a small, abandoned office overlooking the main excavation. He needed proof, something tangible, to confirm Maeve Ear's impossible claims. Skinner Naforn, Silas' confession. Elias found Silas Reed's concealed journal wedged inside the wall of a storage locker. It was hastily written, the handwriting deteriorating from the first page to the last, mirroring the serpent's descent into madness. The journal confirmed everything Maeve had said, but in the frantic, agonizing language of a rational man watching his mind dissolve. October 14th. Caught. Too easy. The town is quiet. Too quiet. The sheriff does not breathe. He only settles. I hear scratching, but it's not external. It's the stone. It's talking about how much better it will be when I'm empty. October 15th. Found the bell. It was hidden in a waste chute. I think one of the guards tried to fight the silence years ago. The bell dampens the whisper, but it amplifies the feeling, the terrible, absolute cold of the entity. I named it the waking silence. Smuggling it out. I have to warn the outside. They can't know about the silence. October 16th. They know I have the bell. They look at me, and I see nothing, but I feel the pressure of 1,000 minds pressing against my skull, all whispering the same word. Yield. The sheriff is smiling in his sleep. I saw the great vein. It's not rock. It's a god sleeping in a coffin of its own solidified fear. They are cutting pieces of its dream. 2:15 a.m., October 17th. The thump. It just happened. I hear its claws in the rock. It's coming for the bell. It's coming for the noise. It knows I am loud. If I don't get out, I will be added to the chorus of quiet. I drop the bell. Please, whoever finds this, don't let the quiet win. It's not peace. It's the end of everything. The final page was scrawled with a repeating symbol, a perfect crystalline circle with a single line drawn through it. A symbol of broken individuality. Silas had been right. He was trying to warn the world. And in his final moments, the entity had claimed him. Chunoi Tunun, v. The Elders. Kanona. Elias left the mine office, his mind reeling, the obsidian bell throbbing in his pocket. He was no longer hunting a man. He was hunting a cult dedicated to a cosmic horror. And he followed a barely noticeable side tunnel that Maeve had mentioned, a path that led away from the vein, but up toward the church's foundation. He emerged into a damp subterranean vault beneath the church, lit by flickering oil lamps. Waiting for him were Sheriff Hale and 4 elderly, pale-faced townsmen, the elders. They sat around a round table, the great veins symbol etched into its center. They were no longer serene. They wore expressions of calm, desperate purpose. "We knew you wouldn't leave, Vance," Sheriff Hale said, his deep voice echoing strangely in the stone room. "You carry too much noise. You are too much like him." Elias leveled his Winchester at them. "Where is Silas Reed?" "He is being prepared," an elder stated, his voice thin but resolute. "He is being integrated. He was volatile, noisy. The vein demands payment for the peace we require." Hale stepped forward, his massive form filling the archway. He spoke with the conviction of a fanatic. "The silence is a gift, Vance. Before the vein, we were filled with pain, fear, rage, and the memory of loss, the screaming chaos of life. We were like you, Elias. You hunt a ghost because you cannot face the moment your sister vanished. We too had such noise." Hale gestured around the room. "The entity takes that noise. It gives us this true calm. We surrender the self, the vanity, the anxiety, the trauma, and we gain tranquility. We are empty, but we are safe." Elias's fingers tightened on the trigger. "You've turned yourselves into livestock." "We've become enlightened," Hale corrected, without heat. "And now, we are ready for the final blessing." Hale led Elias to a small niche. There stood the mechanism Silas had referenced, a massive, crude, amplifying device built around a structure identical to Elias's small bell, but 50 times larger. This was the entity's official damping mechanism, but now it was inverted. "The great vein is awakening," Hale announced, his eyes glowing with terrifying zeal. "It is tired of small sips. When this bell rings, When the silence is broadcast throughout the lannual, individuality will be erased. The whole town, then the world. Total, everlasting peace. Total mental annihilation. Hale reached for a lever near the massive bell. We are offering the whole of our consciousness to keep the entity from merely consuming us. This is the ritual. You, Elias Vance, the noisiest man in the West, are invited to join our silence. Elias realized his sister-in-law's cold trail, the trauma that had haunted him, was not just a personal failure, but the very fuel the entity craved. He had to stop the ritual, or his personal silence would become the world's final truth. He fired his rifle not at Hale, but at the control mechanism next to the great bell. The explosion of noise and timber momentarily broke the eerie calm. Hale roared in anger, the first uncontrolled sound Elias had heard from him, and lunged. Elias had broken the silence, but he had also trapped himself in the chamber of the elders. The great vein was stirring. The shotgun blast, though aimed at the control panel, was absorbed quickly by the dense, unnatural stone of the subterranean vault. The noise was a fleeting, magnificent rupture in the town's absolute silence, quickly smothered by the oppressive presence of the great vein. The elders, who had flinched momentarily, resumed their terrifying calm. Sheriff Hale, whose roar of anger was the first genuine sound Elias had heard from him, did not pull a gun. He charged, a massive silhouette in the flickering lamplight, driven not by rage but by the frantic desperation of a zealot whose ritual was interrupted. Elias dodged the charging bulk, the Winchester useless at this range. He slammed the butt of the rifle into the sheriff's temple. The blow should have dropped a normal man, but Hale barely staggered. His pale eyes were now fully lit with an internal, terrifying energy, reflecting the black light pulsing from the great vein structure above. "You cling to your noise, Elias Vance," Hale hissed, his voice no longer human, but a dry, rattling whisper that echoed the emptiness of the entire town. "Your guilt is a siren. Let us take it. Let us give you peace." Hale grabbed Elias in a bear hug, squeezing the air from his chest. Elias felt the sheriff's clothes were cold and dry, like old parchment. Hale wasn't just physically strong, he was animated by the entity's psychic will. One of the elders, moving with surprising speed, seized the lever Elias had shot at. Despite the shattered wood, the elder managed to force the mechanism. The great bell rang. It did not produce an audible sound. Instead, it released a pulse of pure psychic resonance, Neuronia wave of perfect, absolute silence that struck Elias harder than any physical blow. His vision went white. His ears screamed with the internal pressure. The obsidian bell in his coat pocket throbbed violently, desperately trying to shield him, yet amplifying the entity Raumer's power. The psychic shock threw Elias backward, sending him skidding across the damp stone floor. Sheriff Hale and the elders stood motionless, bathed in the growing black light emanating from the pulsing vein. The resonance wasn't just silence, it was a total erasure of self. Elias suddenly felt lighter than air. The decades of crushing guilt and relentless hunting lifted instantly. He was calm. He was safe. But the price of the calm was the memory. In a terrifying, instantaneous psychic vision, Elias found himself standing not in the vault, but back on the ridge overlooking his hometown. It was the night his sister Sarah vanished. He saw her smiling face, heard her voice, a sweet, clear sound he hadn't fully recalled in years. She wasn't gone. She was standing right there, extending her hand. "Sarah, it's so quiet here, Elias. So peaceful. No more searching, no more pain. Just calm." The vision was so real, so compelling, that Elias instinctively reached for her. The entity wasn't just silencing his mind, it was offering him the one thing he truly wanted: reunion and absolution. Hale's voice, now a booming internal thought, echoed in the vision. "The vein does not kill the memory, Elias. It purifies it. It takes the pain, the guilt, the noise, and leaves only the tranquil essence. Join us. Let her be real again, forever in the total peace." Elias felt the memory of the horrible, soundless thump the night she disappeared, the very memory that had jolted him awake in Act 1, dissolve into a soothing nothingness. He was millimeters from taking Sarah's hand, from surrendering his consciousness to the vein, accepting the quiet as his eternal rest. But the small obsidian bell in his pocket saved him. It vibrated one last time, with a painful, concentrated thrum, not the cold hum of the entity, but a localized, personal vibration that resonated with his own physical body, striking the scar beneath his collarbone. It was a physical reminder of the pain, the struggle, and the choice he had made to search. The small burst of pain brought him back. He saw the truth behind the vision. Sarah's eyes were the pale, empty eyes of the townsfolk. Her hand was cold and gray. "You don't bring her back," Elias choked out, his voice returning, a ragged, defiant sound. "You only make her another part of your silence." The moment Elias rejected the peace, the psychic resonance amplified the external noise of his heart and mind. He was instantly the loudest thing in the vault, his terror and determination acting as a deafening shriek against the vein. He grabbed the heavy crowbar lying near the damaged control panel and swung it wildly at the nearest elder, cracking the man's knee. The elder didn't cry out. He merely slumped, his pale face showing a fleeting shadow of confused, raw agony, and a brief spark of individuality before the silence reclaimed him. Sheriff Hale was upon him again. Elias was pinned against the great vein structure. The black light pulsed violently, and Elias felt his thoughts being ripped from his skull, his life story being consumed. Elias acted on instinct, his gun hand moving faster than his conscious thought. He pulled the small obsidian bell from his pocket and thrust it against the pulsating surface of the great vein structure. The small bell was a shard of the entity's anti-self, a piece of cosmic resistance. When it touched the great vein, the reaction was catastrophic. Instead of silence, the vein emitted a screeching sound that existed only in the mind, a psychic shriek of pain and denial that blew out the oil lamps, plunging the vault into absolute darkness. Elias, shielded slightly by the small bell in his hand, heard the mental sound as a shattering of glass, 1,000 silent minds breaking free, briefly regaining their painful, chaotic humanity. He saw the sheriff recoil, clutching his head, a genuine look of pure, agonizing fear finally crossing his pale features. The forced calm was gone. Hale was drowning in the return of his own repressed guilt, his loss, his noise. "No! The peace! The peace must remain!" Hale screamed, a sound that finally felt real, loud, and full of sorrow. Elias had a single terrible moment of clarity. The vein was not fully destroyed, but it was vulnerable. He raised the crowbar and brought it down with all his remaining strength, not on the vein itself, but on the massive, silent obsidian bell connected to the amplifying mechanism. The strike connected with a dull, shattering thwack. The great bell split in half. The result was not a ring, but a soundless implosion of psychic energy. The black light died. The vein structure slumped, its pulsing ceasing. The oppressive silence that had defined Obsidian Ridge vanished, replaced by the faint normal sounds of stone dripping, wind whistling through the tunnels, and the frantic, shallow breaths of living men. When the dust settled and Elias's mind cleared, the vault was still. Sheriff Hale lay unconscious, his face slack, lines of genuine pain etched around his eyes. The other elders were sprawled, trembling violently, their bodies racked by the sudden, painful return of their full consciousness. The great vein, though still massive and terrible, was inert. The source of the broadcast silence was broken. Elias staggered out of the mine as the sun crested the ridge. He walked through a town that was no longer perfectly synchronized, no longer serenely calm. The spell was broken, but the cure was agony. The townspeople stood frozen on the streets, their movements jerky and confused. They were staring at their hands, at the ground, at each other. They were hearing the sounds of their own thoughts, the cacophony of long-suppressed memories, the full, devastating weight of their individual existence. They had their minds back, but they had lost their peace. A woman standing near the saloon began to sob uncontrollably, the first true noise Elias had heard in Obsidian Ridge. The sound was ragged, raw, and full of all the grief the town had tried to bury. Elias knew the town was saved from annihilation, but it was condemned to chaos. They would need weeks, maybe months, to relearn how to live with their own noisy minds. He walked past them all, his job done. He had failed to bring in Silas Reed, who was presumably assimilated forever into the dead silence of the entity. But he had saved the West from a fate worse than any plague or bandit, the annihilation of individuality. He reached his black horse. Before mounting, he pulled the small obsidian bell from his pocket and looked at it. It was cracked, but whole. It was a fragment of the silence he had fought, but also the memory that had kept him fighting. He thought of Sarah. The wound was still there, the guilt still heavy, but the vein's temptation had clarified one thing. He wouldn't trade the painful memory of her for any false peace. His noise, his sorrow, was his humanity. Elias mounted his horse, tucking the small, cracked bell deep into his coat. He took one last look at the screaming, sobbing, newly alive town of Obsidian Ridge, turned his back, and rode out. Not toward the sunrise, but back toward the raw, chaotic noise of the high desert. The quiet was still quiet, but now it was a chosen silence, not a burden. He had finally accepted the memory of his sister's laughter, even if it was abruptly cut off, and he knew his true bounty was the simple fact of his own noisy, defiant survival.